Welcome back to This Week in Video Game History. I'm your host, Doug Coleman, and you can find me on Twitch, streaming as The Robust One. If you look at January 31st on a calendar, it looks like any other day. But in the video game world, January 31st is something of a fault line. It is on that day when the tectonic plates of the video game world shifted and the landscape forever changed. And depending on the year, January 31st is either a birthday to celebrate or a funeral to mourn. Today's episode, we will rewind to January 31st, 1997 and talk about a betrayal that shook the video game universe, immediately brought about an end of a format, and 4 years later, brought about an end to a scion of the video game world. But this week isn't just heavy hearts and JRPG goodness. No, there were some amazing games that were released this week, including the birth of two major franchises. It is also a week where a fan favorite finally learned how to count to 3. If only it was so easy for other franchises. We have 2 feature stories today, which means we have a lot to get to. So grab your controller and press start to continue. To start off this episode, we will go through some of the major games that were released on this week, and there were some absolute titans. Now, I'm going to couch this and say that this isn't all the games that were released this week, and I'm going to miss a number of fan favorites. For the sake of time, I'm going to limit this episode to 5 quick hits of some of the more bigger names out there. Silent Hill, released on January 31st, 1999 for the original PlayStation. If you were gaming in 1999, I am sure you remember the rivalry. Resident Evil was the absolute king of survival horror. In fact, last week we discussed how Resident Evil 2 released a little over a year earlier. But Silent Hill did something different. Resident Evil was more B-movie camp. Jump scares and dogs jumping through windows. Silent Hill was totally psychological. You played the game as Harry Mason. He wasn't a cop or special agent like Chris Redfield. He was just a guy looking for his daughter. He couldn't aim well, and he stumbled around a lot in a search. It was one of the more memorable times where you started as just some random guy and had to fumble your way around to solve the mystery. And we can't talk about this game without talking about the fog. It's one of the most famous happy accidents in coding history. You see, the PS1 couldn't render the whole town. The draw distance was terrible. So, Team Silent covered the map in a thick gray fog to hide the pop-in. Instead of looking like a glitch, it created one of the most claustrophobic atmospheres in gaming history.
He has no idea what he's getting into.
We jump forward a decade to January 26, 2010, the Xbox 360 era. BioWare drops Mass Effect 2. This is often cited as one of the few perfect sequels in existence. They stripped away the clunky RPG inventory management from the first game, heightened up the shooting, and gave us one of the best cold opens in gaming history, killing off the main character 5 minutes into the game. It takes a lot of guts for a AAA game to do what Mass Effect did. It cleanly summed up how your character essentially restarts, and it made you work to ensure your team survived. If you didn't upgrade the Normandy, and if you didn't earn the crew's loyalty, your favorite characters would die in the final cutscene. Even Shepard could die. It made every choice in the 40-hour campaign feel critical. This is the game that absolutely made me fall in love with BioWare.
You come to us like a snake in the grass. Here, in a city of lies. the biggest liar of them all.
Moving to 2015, January 27th gives us Dying Light. Techland had already made Dead Island, which was fine, but Dying Light added verticality. It wasn't just whacking zombies with a pipe, it was parkour. But the real genius was the day-night cycle. This game tells you night is coming. Suddenly, the game shifts from an action slasher to a stealth horror game instantly. The volatiles come out, and you are no longer the hunter. You are the prey.
This is the one true order of things. But to pretend otherwise is the sheerest folly.
You maniac! You just doomed thousands of innocent people!
January 26th, 2018, Monster Hunter World. For years, Monster Hunter was the game your friend who imported Japanese PSP games just wouldn't shut up about. It was niche, it was clunky, and it was hard to get into. World changed everything. They removed the loading screens between zones. They made weapons feel impactful. And the West finally got it. It became Capcom's best-selling game of all time.
A walking, talking snowman! You really are alive!
Hello. Olaf, are these your friends?
Nope, never met him. Don't know anyone blue, green, or who's oddly spiky.
Finally, on the release timeline for this episode, January 29th, 2019, Kingdom Hearts 3. We waited nearly 14 years for this. A timeline so long that people who played Kingdom Hearts 2 in middle school played Kingdom Hearts 3 after they had their own kids. Whether you loved it or hated the pacing, just seeing it exist felt like a miracle. It closed the book on the Dark Seeker saga. Okay, let's go back to January 31st, 2001. We've talked about some great games this week, but now we got to talk about the business side of things. The end of Sega. Well, the end of hardware Sega. This one feels kind of personal to me. When it first came out, I fell in absolute love with the Dreamcast. I bought one of the first releases when it first came out in the US. It honestly is the first video game system I ever purchased with my own money for myself. Some of my biggest moments in gaming happened right here on this very system. To understand why the end of the Sega hardware was such a shock, you have to remember what the Dreamcast was. It launched on 9/9/99. It was incredible. It had Soul Calibur, Sonic Adventure, Crazy Taxi. It had a modem built in for online play, and you could even buy an Ethernet connector that pops into that spot. It was way ahead of its time. But past mistakes really came back to bite Sega. And by early 2001, the writing was on the wall. The PlayStation 2 had launched in 2000 and it was a DVD player. That was the killer app. People were buying PS2s to watch The Matrix, not just play video games. Sega did not have the cash reserves to fight a price war against Sony. On January 31st, the press release went out. Sega was discontinuing the Dreamcast. They slashed the price to $99.95. $99. They were liquidating them. It wasn't just a console dying, it was a culture shift. For kids who grew up gaming in the 90s, the video game world was binary. Mario versus Sonic, Nintendo versus Sega. Seeing Sonic the Hedgehog show up on the GameCube a year later felt wrong. It felt illegal. But in a way, the Dreamcast never really died. The homebrew community has kept this system alive for decades. But as a major hardware contender, this was the end of the line for Sega. We promised you a double feature this week, and now we have to pay it off. We just talked about January 31st, 2001, the day Sega bowed out of the console wars. Now I want to rewind exactly 4 years earlier, January 31st, 1997. The location? Japan. The event? The release of Final Fantasy VII. Now, everybody knows Final Fantasy VII is a classic. But to understand why this specific week was so explosive, you have to understand the context. This wasn't just a game release. It was a political coup for the entire 16-bit era. Square, now known as Square Enix, and Nintendo were married. You didn't release Final Fantasy on Sega, you released it on Nintendo. But in 1996, the industry was moving to 3D. Nintendo was preparing the Nintendo 64. Square had grand ambitions. They wanted cinema. They wanted pre-rendered backgrounds. They wanted full motion video. The problem was the math. Nintendo insisted on sticking with cartridges for the N64 to prevent piracy and to keep load times down. But cartridges only held about 64 megabytes of data. Square's vision for Final Fantasy VII? It required CD-ROM. A CD-ROM holds around 650 megabytes. Square realized that if they stayed with Nintendo, they would have to cut their vision in half. They needed space. And who had the space? The new kid on the block, Sony. When Square announced they were moving Final Fantasy, the crown jewel of RPGs, to the PlayStation, it was an earthquake. It signaled to every other developer in Japan, the ship is turning. Nintendo is the past, Sony is the future. On January 31st, 1997, when Japanese gamers lined up around the block to buy Final Fantasy VII, they weren't buying a game. They were buying a PlayStation. This was the week Sony officially won the generation. And the game lived up to the hype. We take it for granted now, but in January 97, we had never seen anything like this. The seamless transition from a cutscene to gameplay, the camera sweeping around Midgar. It was the first time a video game truly felt like a Hollywood production. It cost $45 million to make, which was unheard of at the time, and had a marketing budget of $100 million. So looking back this week, January 31st, 1997, Square proves that discs are the future, propelling PlayStation to dominance. January 31st, 2001, Sega, unable to compete with the very same PlayStation momentum, folds the Dreamcast. It was almost poetic. The event that started on January 31st, 1997, directly caused the event on January 31st, 2001. Final Fantasy VII built the army that eventually killed the Dreamcast. So there you have it, a tale of two January 31st, one that built an empire with a Buster Sword, and one that ended it with a spiral. This week was a heavy one. We had the fear of Silent Hill, the triumph of Mass Effect 2, the long-awaited arrival of Kingdom Hearts 3, and the alpha and the omega of the console wars. I want to know your take. Do you think the Dreamcast would have survived if Final Fantasy VII had never made the PlayStation so dominant? Or was Sega doomed either way? Let me know in the comments or shoot me a message in the Discord. I'm Doug Coleman, and this has been This Week in Video Game History. Don't forget to save your game, and I'll see you next week.